Welcome back to another episode of the On Point podcast, where we explore what's next in medical affairs with leaders who are shaping the future. I am thrilled about today's guest because she brings a wealth of experience and vision and practical leadership to the table. Joining me is Dr. Rachel Couchenour, PharmD, MBA, currently the Vice President of Global Medical Affairs at Travere Therapeutics, and she's been instrumental in transforming and growing a patient-inspired global medical affairs organization and has led the charge for Travere's first launch in the rare kidney disease space. Before Travere, Rachel has been the head of U.S. Medical Affairs at Novartis Gene Therapies, where she was really involved in the strategy for the first systemic gene therapy product launch, and has held many other leadership roles in companies like Lundbeck, building a deep expertise in everything from early stage development through post-launch strategy, KOL engagement, scientific communications. We're going to hear it all. And most recently, Rachel just delivered an outstanding presentation at the Medical Affairs Professional Society Americas Meeting 2025 on really building and leading a medical affairs organization in a resource-constrained environment. So if you missed it, you're definitely going to want to stick around for this conversation because we're going to dive into the thinking behind that talk, find out what the questions were that she had to answer, and so much more. Welcome to On Point, the Medical Excellence Podcast, where we talk to pharma leaders about how to build highly effective medical affairs organizations. Rachel, thank you for joining us. I am so excited for this conversation.
Thank you, Scott. I think for that very gracious introduction, I think what you basically just shared that I am chronologically gifted. Been around the block a little while.
Oh, well, we're so lucky that you're going to share kind of that experience with us. There's so many people that are going through that journey, through that transition, involved in different parts of the organization. Especially this year, there's been so much shift in where people are, and there's some of the larger companies have been going through downsizing, and I'm seeing people move to smaller organizations that they might not be used to. So really getting to learn about that will be just a great experience for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I was worried going to MAPS that no one would show up for our session. I'm like, do people, will they come to a small and emerging, biotech discussion? And we were pleasantly surprised, me and my co-presenters, that both times we were able to deliver that discussion, that the room was packed, and met a lot of individuals that sit in situations of organizations where they're ends of one or, 3 to 5 people in their medical affairs organization. So definitely a place that many of us have sat in. And it was, I'd like to say, almost a little bit of a therapy session for some of us. And they were discussing, how best to deliver to execute, I guess, on a medical affairs strategy to support these products for the patients that we serve.
Awesome. Well, whether it's their first role in medical affairs and they're starting at a small organization, or they're transferring from a large pharma to a smaller team, or even an N of one, maybe you could just start by telling us just a little bit about kind of that foundation of what it's like to be kind of that small team, N of one medical affairs leader. What were some of the key points from your talk?
Well, what we started off with is we tried to set the foundation of what is it that medical affairs, what is it that we do? Why do we exist? And while I didn't need to tell a room of leaders about this, we did align on it that medical affairs were really lucky. We sit in this pivotal role between clinical innovation, clinical practice, and patient care. So
Okay.
if we're sitting there and we have that responsibility to ensure that our products are being developed and communicated in a way that can be understood, what are the levers that we can pull? And so we aligned in our discussion around 4 different pillars. And these pillars of medical affairs, I don't know that they will be a surprise to your audience, but there's 4 things that we traditionally do in medical affairs. We generate data. So there's evidence generation. The other thing that we often, that we do as a part of our role in medical affairs is we do stakeholder engagement. It's a big part of our role. I think most people are familiar with that because of the work that we do with field medical. We also do scientific communication, whether that's through publications, whether that's through our, medical information that we do. And lastly, we do medical education, and that can be in the form of delivered by the company or as CME.
Got
So
it.
those are
And
the 4 areas that we talked a lot about as it related to preparing for launch.
awesome. And so those are for anybody listening, right? Those are the same functions that kind of are true for large pharma. But in large pharma, you might have 20 or 30 people doing each of those. So kind of like, what's different? Like if you're a small team and N of one, like where do you start if you still have all of those expectations on you, but right, you don't have teams to do it all?
We did talk about that, and for each organization, it's going to be different. I think it depends on, where you are when you join the organization, as it relates to a launch, what type of product that you are, preparing for. Because you have to remember too, many times these small emerging biotechs, you have you're one asset company.
Mhm.
So you have all your eggs in one basket. So you need to take into account, you know, what is going to make the biggest impact now? So rather than doing it all at once, I'd like to say sometimes you have to sequence it because if you are just an N of one, there's only so many balls you can keep up in the air. And I shared some of my not so best practices that I did leading, organizations earlier in my career because I tried to do it all at once and you can't, and you have to give yourself a little bit of grace. And so it's about prioritization.
So how do you go about prioritizing there? Like what were some of those lessons that you learned early on that you've been applying more recently?
The one that I shared up front and I'll share with the audience today is I was I felt a lot of pressure from, our executive team when I joined my first startup company as an N of one. And they're like, you need people out there engaging, you need MSLs. So that's what I did. I hired through a contract organization, a contract team. They were very talented individuals. They knew what they needed to do. And they went out. And what I realized later is, what were they out there talking about? We didn't have a scientific communications platform yet or a lexicon. And the not so best practice that we found out about this is no one was talking consistently about our disease state. No one was talking consistently about our product. And it's hard to build a brand and to, have a paradigm shift. This was in a rare disease where people weren't really looking for it, to have them to be thinking about it top of mind if we weren't as an organization talking about it consistently. So I think one of the places you have to start is in your scientific communication, building those foundations through your scientific communications platform and agreeing on that across the organization. Because you don't want your IR team, in press releases talking about your product or your disease or condition differently than you are in medical affairs. And that was an early lesson for me.
That's fantastic. So out of all of the I mean, let's assume that you've got some data or else medical affairs wouldn't be there yet. But then after that,
Yep.
so your first step you would suggest is, really focus on your scientific narrative, focus on
Well,
kind of the language and how you're going to talk. What
yes.
after that?
Well, you want to disseminate out there. You need to get your data disseminated, and there's many ways, right, that you can do that. And I think it is based on, again, I I'm not trying to be evasive in my answer here, not answer your question, but it really is dependent whether or not we are talking about a rare disease. I've been in rare disease for the last 15 years on how we want to disseminate the information. And it's also been dependent on your audience. I do think MSLs are critical or some type of field based team going out there and engaging with your investigators and your top KOLs. You want to make sure you're engaging with the right people. I did find, I think we've gotten a lot better at KOL identification now than we used to be. But 15 years ago, in a rare disease, the KOL identification would get you your top 20 or so.
Mhm.
Didn't do so great below that. But, knowing that you are targeting the right people, where they want to be targeted. And I'll give an anecdote right now because I'm in a rare disease calling on an audience that I've never engaged with previously, and that's nephrologists.
Okay.
I have learned and been educated by my team that nephrologists love to engage in the social channels like X. They receive
Mm.
education and i- do journal clubs over X. So we've had to invest now in innovation or an innovation function that
Mhm.
helped us to understand the best way to engage with them digitally and identify digital KOLs. But that did come at the expense of some of our operational work. You know, we had to forego a headcount that led up operational excellence in order to shift it to digital innovation. And that's, sometimes leads to some issues in our internal infrastructure, but it was the right move at that time.
Got it.
So I hope that helps, a little bit. Another area for me, and then I'll take a pause, is in evidence generation. We all know that that is critical to answer data gaps, but we need to be out there through our stakeholder engagement, gathering insights. That's a big part of it, right? To understand what are the unanswered questions that are leading to access issues, whether it's access at the HCP level, because if they don't understand and feel confident utilizing your product, they won't, you know, be writing it or discussing it with their patients. Or it can be at the payer level. And if you aren't collecting that data, thinking about your data gaps and planning for data generation beyond
Mm.
your phase 3 study, you're going to end up at a point in your life cycle where you don't have new things to talk about, nor can you close those gaps. And that's an area for me and small emerging biotechs that tends to go to the back burner. And it's something I've learned more recently. We have to put more effort into, and we do have to allocate funds sooner versus late.
Got it. So one of the images that I always think of is like when you're in the small biotech, small pharma space, you still have all those same hats on, but one person has all those hats on. And you said,
Yep.
you had to make a trade-off decision, for headcount to choose kind of where you're going to spend that time. What does
Yes.
that what does that do to the leader who still has all those hats they have to wear? And how do you prepare yourself if you're not accustomed to having to wear all those hats to take on that role?
That's a really hard question. God, I don't know that you can ever be prepared. I think in my first role, I I I look back and sometimes think how naive I was going to one of these small companies. I was at Sanofi for the 10 years prior. I would like to think Sanofi prepared me very well, but it did not prepare me for all of the depth of knowledge you would need to wear all of those hats. And what I would say is don't be afraid to acknowledge where you don't have that skill set or expertise and go out and seek it. I was fortunate at that company. I did. So there's two different types of resources, right? Headcount and then financial. And I had resources to hire agency partners and consultants to fill some of those roles. And I had to lean on them very heavily. And then through my network, which is so critical when you're a small biotech, reached out to colleagues and said, how do you do this? And, you just have to check your ego at the door
Mm.
and ask for the help and ask for examples. And you will make mistakes. Like I said, I've made them along the way, but you course correct as quickly as you can.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, coming home from MAPS, medical affairs professionals are happy to share, right? I
Yeah,
mean, like we loved like it's such a tight-knit community and everybody was giving each other advice, sharing their best practices, sharing the mistakes they've made. It's a very open community to learn in.
I agree. I feel so fortunate with the relationships and the individuals I've met in this, profession that we have all chosen to go into. It's really helped me along the way, and it is so much fun going to mats and getting to see people and find out where they are now if it's been a minute since you have seen
Right.
them.
Yep.
Yeah.
So one of the conversations I had this week that I found really interesting is that folks that are moving to small pharma, small biotechs, especially if they're the first medical affairs hire, have a lot of teaching to do to the rest of their organization. They tend to be a very commercially focused organization at that point. Can you tell me kind of your experience in helping small companies understand even what medical affairs can't do, why we should do those things?
Yeah. I have to say my current organization, when I came in, I was fortunate. Our CEO were at Travere. He came up through the industry, through medical affairs. He started as an MSL.
Wow.
So he understands medical affairs. But I have been at 3 other small emerging companies where they didn't have that same level of knowledge. And, what I have used as best practices is you can't go in and tell people. As I've gotten you know, along in my career and as a leader, I've learned no matter what it is, you can't tell people. You have to bring them along. And, a practice that I have instituted, even at Travere, where I do think medical affairs is appreciated, is I look at who are my internal stakeholders? Who are the people that really matter, that understand what we're doing? They may not realize it, and I've mapped them out, and I set up regular one-on-ones. And my first engagement with them is I ask, "What do they need from me?" "What do they expect from medical affairs?" And I listen, and it's hard not to want to tell them what I can do for them, but I listen, and then I try to bring up where how we might be able
Mm.
to support their need. I try to understand what are the pain points. And now I, when I go into cross-functional meetings, I listen to where they're having issues as it relates, even if it's related to generating new scripts, which they're very focused on,
Right.
but getting to the why of that. You know, is it is it something that the HCPs don't believe or understand? And say, "This is something that our team can try to address."
Mm.
So I try to flip the tables on people, so to speak, and address their needs, and I would like to say that's I've gotten a lot better at it. I can't say I was great at that at the beginning of my career, but I have an example. I shared this in our session that recently when someone said, "How do you get more money?" or "How do you get more headcount?" And
Mhm.
this did happen recently. I have developed a good partnership with our head of strategy and our head of marketing. And we talked about some of the issues we've had in our most recent launch. And we decided that, they agreed that one of the best approaches would be for medical affairs to be able to handle it. So we went in together
Mm.
to a board of directors meeting requesting additional headcount for medical affairs,
Wow.
and commercial was willing to give up one so we could have what we needed.
That's amazing. You know,
It it
and
felt it was amazing. It felt really good.
right, and isn't it funny how different that is from what I usually see in big pharma, where we argue for our head count and we argue for our budget and then figure out what we're gonna go do with it?
Yeah.
Versus like, "Hey, we have a common problem, a common goal that's
Mhm.
prioritized across the organization. Then let's figure out what resources we should apply in order to get that done."
Yeah.
Like,
And isn't that what we should do in general in medical affairs too? I we fall in love sometimes I was saying this, just going through the the exhibitor hall. There's so many amazing solutions out there, and we fall in love with a solution, and I'm like, we can't back a problem into it. So my latest things with my team is I say, how are we gonna know we're successful? Then let's think about or what success will look like. Then let's think about the executional activity that we should be doing. And that's even more important in these smaller resource constrained companies. And it's sometimes hard, right, in medical affairs to know exactly what it is that you're doing that is
Yeah.
leading to the outcomes that you want.
So let me ask. So, you know, there's the name of your talk was a resource constrained organization.
Mhm.
And I can tell you, no matter what size organization I work with, big, medium, small, everybody says, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough money, we don't have, right? And so everybody feels resource constrained. What are
Yes.
you seeing as you've moved between different size organizations of what that means? Because I'm assuming what that means for you is very different than somebody who has 100 people and they're spending millions of dollars on the same thing that you've got one person doing.
Yes. I like to joke that we do things with bubblegum and shoelaces to get it done. But what does it mean for us? I think it's more how we, you know, address it. You go to some of these talks and they're like, go speak to your head, your global head of field excellence or something. And I'm like, okay,
That's me.
that might be me or that, we don't have that position. And so it gets back to the prioritization, what's really important and being clear in your planning. What is it you really need to do? I encourage, you know, and even when I've had smaller teams than what I have right now, I encourage my team to really take the time up front, look at what insights we have, what's come from the brand, and for
Hmm.
us to think about what it is that we can do to to impact that. What education, and let's really double down on that. We can't we can't educate on everything. We can't boil the ocean. That's what is a common saying that I use. We need to find our little duck pond that when we rein in the duck pond, it's going to feel that, we're going to feel the impact. So I think we just have to become a little more singularly focused and spend more time and upfront on what is really the crux of the problem. When you think you know why, ask why again. And it's kind of like when you're collecting insights when talking to a KOL.
Hmm.
What keep asking that next question. We do the same thing in our planning. So it's about the prioritization, you know,
Yeah.
and and the other piece, I'm sorry, I was just reminded that we I think are probably better than maybe other companies with more resources and people is working across, you know, trying to use the same resource across multiple different verticals. For instance, I mentioned we had a digital innovation group now, and they're in charge of our X channel and our website.
Yeah.
And so we don't try to recreate content for the website that we wouldn't use by our MSLs or that haven't been, that our SciComm team hasn't already generated. It may be
Hmm.
tweaked a little bit to make it better positioned on our website and vice versa. If there's something that we have a need for our digital, KOL, we try to make sure that it also can be used by others in the organization where I think in larger organizations, you might not have that as good of, crosstalk. And it's not to say we're perfect at it yet. We still find instances where we're dual creating content and we're a
Right.
small little team.
Isn't it funny? Like I sat through all these omni-channel meetings this week at Maps, and they're all trying to achieve that.
Yes.
They're all like, wow, we wish we could be a little bit more constrained and do less materials and reuse them and have omni-channel
Well,
experience. It's so funny.
it's true. And we haven't done it yet, but something that we'll be kicking off this month at my organization. And I'm hopeful that will help us get even better at this is we're calling it an agency ecosystem. And we're going to ask our agencies, and I think others do this. When I was at MAPS and mentioned it,
Hmm.
actually one of the agency partners in the room raised their hand and said, we do this, where the organization brings all of their agencies together on a monthly or a bi-monthly basis, and you pick your top projects or initiatives and review them across our department and with the agencies so
Love
they understand what's going on. And I'm hoping through this, we're going to get more efficiencies. We're going to require our agencies to talk to each other.
That's fantastic. So
Yeah. We'll
tell me
see
a little
how
bit
it
about
goes, but that's it.
maybe it's different in small pharma, small
Uh-huh.
biotech, but when I look at, teams that have tried that in large organizations, they've got so many vendors and so many agencies that they compete with each other that it's really
Yeah.
hard to get them in the room. Is this different in the organizations that you're part of?
I've done this at a previous small organization, which we became commercial, which is where we are at Travere also. And we invited in across commercial and medical, our agency partners in as part of our strategic planning. And we gave each group a kind of problem to deal with. I ended up in a breakout group in this one instance with the agency of record for the marketing team. And it was fascinating because what they could do is bring in examples that they use with other clients. And they did share openly with the other agencies in the room. And, we will be rolling this out to our agencies. And I've kind of been soft pedaling it with some of the ones that we work with. We don't have hundreds of agencies that we work with. We have about 3 key agencies that we work with and a few others that are specialized for an individual project, and have let them know that this is going to be our expectation and
Nice.
share why. Some of it's I looked at our budget from last year and we spent way too much money on content creation. And I'm like, we can't do that. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't help with consistency. It doesn't help, our budget.
Yeah.
And they, at least in these initial meetings, they've been open to it. Now we haven't brought them together yet, but it's not that we're trying to take work away from one or the other. Our
Yeah.
budget is our budget, but we want the people that can help us do it most efficiently.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, what other creative ways are you seeing small, resource constrained organizations stretching their dollars, stretching their impact with what they have?
Well, the one that we already mentioned, trying to utilize things through multiple channels. And, I think a lot of it, the upfront and selecting we talked a lot about this in our sessions, selecting the right partners for you. And, through my career early on, I remember one of the agencies that I found was not one of these big ones. We won't name any of them, that have all consolidated, but it was a newer, smaller boutique organization. And our business really mattered to them. And they were willing to work with us based on the budgets we've had. So I have not been afraid to go to newer organizations, of course, getting references, but also saying, we're not, I love to say, we're not a Pfizer, and really discuss what is a nice to have versus a need to have. So that's been the biggest one because, a lot of the money that you spend, you know, or that I've seen in our budgets is through your partners that you have to help you achieve your work.
So, I've known several folks who say they're really excited about moving to small pharma, taking everything they learned in big pharma and going and being able to just do it. And they've got this perception that things will be a lot easier because at big
Cool.
pharma, they were telling me they're spending 3/4 of their time just getting alignment on things. And you have so many stakeholders and so many people involved that you don't get to spend a lot of time doing the work. You're spending all this time talking about the work. What is the reality? How does it compare to that?
Uh, I find that funny in some ways because when you're hiring people or when people are thinking about coming to a smaller organization, there's 3 things I always think about: their knowledge, their skills, and their attitude.
Okay.
We can't teach an attitude or a behavior, and That's, we try to interview for that, and the individual has to decide, are
Hmm.
they gonna be able to fit into one of these less structured. And the knowledge side of it is, in a rare disease, you're usually not gonna find people with experience, so we have to teach them the knowledge. It's the skills I don't have time to teach people.
Hmm. Okay.
So oftentimes when I bring in someone from a larger organization who says, "Yes, yes, yes, I wanna go to small and emerging, I want," and they have the skills, they some of them do great and can just move ahead. Some of them flounder because we don't have the processes and governance in place generally that you're going to find in a larger organization. And that's hard for them. While you may not have to have as many levels of approvals or, committees that you have to go through to do the work, that part is true. That is a reality. You align with your team, which is small, might just be you,
Yeah.
but you've got to feel comfortable that you may not have an SOP that tells you how to do it. You may
Hmm.
not have a ad board approval form or whatever you may have had to go through before to get it done, and
Sure.
but
Hmm.
bringing people along, I don't care the size of your organization. I've been at organizations that are less than 50. I've been at organizations up to, about 200. I've been in one that we were 17 strong, and my current organization is about 400. You still have to bring people along.
Hmm.
No one likes to be surprised. Everyone wants to feel like they have a say. And that's where just, I mentioned the way that I have approached it is my internal stakeholder mapping and just keeping people informed, asking, and then saying, how do you feel about this? How can I help you? And this is what we're thinking, and never having it fully baked, when it's a big project, to allow for a little bit of wiggle room.
So I love what you said about, oftentimes there won't be all the structure and the forms and the systems and the processes. And, I think of it as, right, there's some people who can make better art with a blank piece of paper, and there's other people who need color by number, right? And so it sounds like, one of those key things is that, like, hey, you're not going to have all the structure, you're not going to have all the processes, you still have to deliver compliantly, effectively, efficiently. And so how do you find those people that would thrive in that environment? Like, do you have this test or this interview question, or is it just an aura? Like how do you find them?
It is a great question, and I can't say that we have nailed it, but we do have you know, some behavioral interviewing questions that we utilize to try to get at it. But sometimes you just never know because people can get through an interview, but we try to give them scenarios, and tell them what I found is I'm usually very transparent. Listen, we need you to this is what the role is, and this
Mhm.
is what we have available. And I, you can ask them some behavioral questions, but I also say, how, how does this align with what you've done? I ask them how they have accomplished it in the past. And I try to give them a very realistic view of what it would be like. The exciting part is they can create it, they can make it the way of company at whatever company they're considering going to. The things they didn't like about their prior company, that's why I tell people all the time, now that I'm at Travere, if they're considering joining us, you don't like it where at your company, help us make it better here. Like,
Love that.
you can really make a lasting, impact here to make the Travere way, I believe it.
Nice. That makes me think of a challenge in smaller organizations in general, and that's around career development and growth and not having, ladders to climb, or if there are, there's only two rungs. So how do you handle that in small organizations, and how do you attract people who are career ambitious and want to make a big difference? How do you, deal with that in a small organization?
That's something that we talk about a lot, and I think about a lot as a leader, because we do want to attract top talent that feels like they still have a growth trajectory. But I like to think of career development not as a ladder, but as if you think about on the jungle gyms, those ones that are more like a dome. And
Yeah.
sometimes, career development is going sideways on those things.
Hmm.
So lots of opportunities I share with people to try different things at a small and emerging. You see something that needs to be done. I mean, 9 times out of 10, if you come to me, you know, this is how I approach it. I'm gonna say, "Yes, let's
Mhm.
try it. Let's do it." So I think you have a lot more latitude. Your lane is not as narrow in the larger company. There may not be the career ladder, but career opportunities, experiences, and exposures are tremendous. I recently had an MSL, and she wants to do something different, and we talked about it, and I'm like, "This sounds like a great idea." I said, "Come back to me with a job description and align with the business need
Mhm.
and see if we can move it forward," you know? And I do, it is on the individual,
Yeah.
I think that doesn't matter what size company, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's something it's really hard to switch that orientation. So I've worked for huge Fortune 500 companies, small companies, my own company, and,
Yeah.
I tell people in our smaller company, I said, "I don't actually have boxes." Like, I don't know what box it is, but, we have,
Yeah.
I call it skill stacking, right? And
I love that.
you go and you collect skills, and you're not a title, you're a set of skills, and you use those skills in many different ways. And we'll kind of brass tack it, right? Sometimes people say, "Yeah, I love the idea of being, going horizontal and trying different things, but what about the money?" Right? Like, at some
Fair.
point it comes up, and what I've told folks, and I've seen it work in small pharma, is like, look, if you can get use those skills to create leverage, right? To find innovative ways to communicate to a larger group of people to make a bigger impact you will get recognized for that, right? They're going to need to retain you. So do it. But, it's not just owed to you. You have to go get it.
Right. I love that, and I'm gonna steal your skill stacking. I think that's amazing. I think I found most of the small organizations I've been at to be very competitive. I don't know if there is a misconception out there that the pay scales are less. I think in some instances it's better. Our HR department does benchmarking, and we know to attract and retain talent, we have to be competitive from the financial side. And, you know, you have to, take into account there could be some upside, right? With, with your long-term incentives in some of these small companies.
Mm.
But it doesn't always work out. I was at one
Yeah.
small company that did the definitive study and, you know, the molecule did not make it. It was not commercially viable. So I get that risk. But if finances is what you're looking for, there's probably more upside. I just personally have found it more rewarding being in the smaller companies for many reasons, but that's the individual's decision. You know,
Yeah.
I think in the smaller company, while everyone talks about being focused on the patient, we're able to live it
Yeah.
more, and particularly in rare diseases. Because when the community's so small, you end up meeting the families and meeting the patients that were part of your clinical trials. And because they may be standing up with you in an advisory committee for the FDA, or they, come in and talk to us. They read our protocols. They do all the things that many companies talk about, and that I feel very fortunate from that aspect in the small companies. It fuels me, and I think many others that choose to come into these, smaller companies.
Love that. Okay, I'm gonna ask you four quick hit questions here. You
Oh
ready?
gosh, I hope I can do this.
You got this. So, if you were put on the spot to give advice for somebody choosing a small company to go to, what do you look for?
If I was going to give advice, I would tell them to be open-minded and to not always put a wall up and say why you can't do something. Those are the people that maybe won't do as well. You know, try to be open to new experiences and new ways of doing it. That those people have been at larger companies they may have had to do it certain ways because of CIAs or whatever,
Hmm.
and be open to focus on what it is you're trying to achieve.
Got it. And if I, when I look at big companies, the Pfizers and the Novartises, the Sanofis, the Bears, like there's this perception of stability and this perception of, longevity. How do I pick a company that I believe will succeed? What do you look for to say, yeah, I think that they're going to win?
Well, I think it's a fallacy to think that you have stability in the large companies, first of all, and you probably know this better than me. But as new leadership comes in and they have new ideas, the organizational structure, my experience at Sanofi, every 18 months was shifting and a lot of people were let go. So I don't think there is stability in the bigger companies, although you do hear about people that stayed the 30 years. But as far as, stability, what do I look for in these smaller companies? I think it's important to know what their funding trajectory is. Do they have enough money to get through their pivotal trials? You
Okay.
know? But I didn't realize that in my first startup, I'll be very honest. And we were not funded through
Hmm.
approval. And luckily it worked out well, even though we went through a complete response letter. I just learned so much at that particular organization. But funding is important overall for the organization and also the reputation of your CEO. Is your CEO well respected on the street? Do people believe him? I would read some of the quarterly earning and what analysts are saying about your company
Hmm.
because the company always positions themselves in the best light as it relates to their scientific data. So that's something I do now that I hadn't maybe looked at as closely in the past. And then also something I have done in the more recent past when I'm interviewing, I do ask about what their thoughts are for medical affairs.
Mm.
And I ask about resourcing. That's important to me. If they want me to do a good job, there has to be at least and for everyone, this number will be different, but at least an adequate amount of funding and FTE to achieve those goals. Because otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure. And I didn't do that in my first small biotech. I didn't ask those questions and didn't realize that I was never going to get any headcount and had to do it all through agency partners.
Wow. Yeah. I picture it a lot like, almost like a consultant or a contractor that says, hey, tell me what you're trying to accomplish. I'll give you direction on how to get there. And here's what it would take. Are you
Mhm.
aligned with that scope? Are you aligned with the resources that we need to do it? Or else I can't succeed. I can't win for you.
Right. Exactly. And not everyone's going to feel comfortable with that. It's taken me, time and experience to to feel confident in doing that.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're doing these podcasts is so that other people who don't have that time and experience can fast forward that learning from you.
Yeah. If well, don't make the mistakes I've made.
All right. What was
But
the biggest one? What's the mistake that you want everybody to learn from then?
what is the mistake? Oh gosh, there's so many. I'm joking. Um, you know, I mentioned earlier about jumping in and being overly influenced by, what the executive team wanted. They hired me, they hire us to think. And I just went and executed without thinking. So I would say that's been my biggest mistake across my years is I just take it at face value. You get really busy, hair on fire, everything's got to be done now at once. But if you allowed yourself the grace and the time to take a step back and think, block some time in your calendar to
Mm.
really think about it and come forward with a cogent plan and your thoughts on it. And maybe you will be aligned with what they said, but in your heart of hearts, you have to feel like that's the right thing. You're the expert in medical affairs. So I would say it's been a couple of times in my career and, like share the example of hiring the MSLs first. If you go back and do a root cause analysis, it's been because I didn't take the time and use my own intellect and experience to make the plan and just went with what others said.
Well, appreciate that. I think it's hard to take the time to do that, as you said, when you are running and trying to execute. But, it sounds, especially when there isn't the plan already in place, that you're there to just execute. You're the one who creates it. You need the time to think, or else
Right.
you can't have a vision that's big enough for people to rally around.
Exactly. I mean, how much time, Scott, do you spend in, you know, do you dedicate time in your calendar for thinking?
I do. Yeah, I actually have 2 hours a day that I don't do any meetings. I don't have my computer on. I just have a notepad and I collect a list from the day before of all the stuff to think about and prioritize, and just sit down, and I actually have a recording device, and I'll just talk out. Can you see it? There it is. And I'll just talk out loud these thoughts and then let AI summarize them for me and then share those with others.
I love that. 2 hours is my goal. I don't always get 2 hours, and sometimes it's fragmented, but you do need that. That is my goal every day, to have 2 hours too, but I like that, turning your computer all the way off. That's smart.
Yeah, for me, I like doing it for the first hour in the morning with my coffee, and then I like to do the
Um,
second hour driving a tractor.
for quick tractor. Oh, wow.
My favorite place to think.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
I physically relocate too when it's really I will go down. I mean, I work when I'm working from home, I
yeah,
go downstairs and sit at my kitchen counter and take a
and
notepad,
think.
but I usually take my computer too.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I have to ask, while we're talking about some funny things. So, anybody who's doing this on video, not audio, is going to ask about that flamingo.
That's
So,
first that first thing
tell me about the flamingo. Tell everybody.
I will. You probably can't see, he has a friend sitting to, I guess, the right of him is a squirrel. Anyone who's worked with me would agree I am a squirrel. I get ideas and it just leads me to another. I'm an activator and I think about lots of things. And so we have a team mascot. His name is Nutty the squirrel. I usually bring him to team meeting. I forgot to bring Nutty, and we were down in Florida at a team meeting, and in their gift shop, they had a flamingo, and we decided that we would get Flossie. That's Flossie sitting on my counter back there. Flossie, the focused flamingo.
Nice. Everybody
So
needs reminders, like stay
that's right.
focused, do what's important. Um,
Yes.
so last question for you. I'm so excited for this. So, given all the things that are changing in medical affairs, you just got back from MAPS. There were tons of new ideas and technologies and aspirations and lessons. What are you focused on over the next 3 years to become the leader you need to be going forward?
My focus right now, and I was singularly focused at MAPS and only spoke to vendor partners and tried to attend sessions that were focused on how we show the impact and outcomes of what we do. And I know it's been an age-long question, but I posed that question to everyone I talk to, "How do you do it?" And I don't think we have it nailed yet. And over the next several, at least this year and beyond, I want to really get better at that, because I think the work that we do takes a little bit longer to really see, and that's why we've been stuck in capturing activity and such. But I I I want to figure out what the right combination is so my organization can see what I see and what I feel in my gut and the impact that I think we're making on patient care. But we need to find some surrogate outcome measures. So that's, for me, very important.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have the aspiration where the purpose is changing patient lives. And there's
Right.
just too many steps between where I sit and where they sit. So I have to have those goals in between to know
Yeah.
that I'm actually headed that direction. So,
Yeah, exactly. I want to get everybody thinking that way, because otherwise you just try to do more and more activity if you're not thinking about ultimately what we're trying to achieve and how
excellent.
that activity might get us there.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you found some really great answers and that you kind of continue to develop your point of view on that. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that this is a very different perspective than a lot of the other guests we've had on the podcast. And so I really appreciate you sharing with the medical community your lessons and your learnings and aspirations for what they could do next.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me. This was fun. I appreciate it.
Thank you.